Welcome to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani. Also on Twitter and Periscope. At Vin Armani is my handle there. You can check out all of our audio archives by visiting activistpost.com, as we are proud members of the Activist Post podcast network. In addition to that, we are members of the Liberty Radio Network. That's at lrn.fm. You can check out the Liberty Radio Network on dozens of terrestrial radio stations, as well as satellite, and of course, streaming online, lrn.fm. A lot of great content there, a lot of it coming from out of the free state of New Hampshire, where I am now, including Free Talk Live. And I will be co-hosting Free Talk Live tomorrow evening, so be sure to check that out, lrn.fm. Well, it's Monday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we've got a great show planned for you today. Our guest today is Chris DeRose, someone who I've always had a great time chatting with. He's been great on this show, one of the favorite guests that we've had. He's become quite controversial lately for taking a stand on protecting the Bitcoin brand. And I think that he's exposed a lot of blind spots with what he recently did in terms of proposing that Bitcoin Core, which is I guess you could say it is the software descendant, or it is the direct lineage from the original Bitcoin client created by Satoshi Nakamoto. He had the audacity to suggest that they have a mission statement for themselves and define what they are, and more broadly to define what Bitcoin is. And we're going to talk to him about what exactly happened and what he thinks that could mean in terms of the future of decentralized governance. It should be a really interesting show. Also, in the first hour, we're going to talk about the Byzantine generals problem. This is the idea that Satoshi Nakamoto supposedly solved. It's a game theory problem. We're going to talk about exactly what that is and why actually thinking about Bitcoin can help us think more even about our own lives. I think you're really going to enjoy this show, and I think it's going to be very thought-provoking. So, to help me get through all of these things today, as always, my good friend, co-host, and producer, Mr. Christian Reyes. Christian.
Good morning, Vin.
Good morning, sir.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great.
Okay, so we've got an interesting show, man. I've got a lot of stuff here. It's, I often wonder when I'm going to do such a crypto-heavy show, although as of late, a lot of the shows are very crypto-heavy. What I really am after is trying to communicate to people the value of thinking about the ideas that are contained within Bitcoin and within cryptocurrency, and thinking about them not as technical or technological ideas, because that's the weird thing about them, is that they're not. What they are is they're abstractions. Contained within the ideas in Bitcoin are abstractions of problems and concepts that have been with humans since the very beginning.
Interesting.
And in many ways, it's a way of us being able to have this little laboratory, almost like a model. Like it's a computer model,
right,
of human behavior, of human value. I mean, you can see that just looking at it. Just looking at the idea that, it's an imaginary good.
Yeah.
Right? Daniel Krawitz used that term when we had him on the show. Bitcoin is an imaginary good. And yet, Bitcoin and the market that has come from out of it, the forks, the various different cryptocurrencies, all of this started with Bitcoin. It's entries on a ledger, and yet it's billions of dollars, worth billions of dollars. And broader than that, in terms of what it's worth in terms of price, that's only a reflection of how people view its utility, right? So it's broader than that in terms of it has the ability to free humanity if we use it in the right way.
Right.
Which is pretty amazing for an imaginary good. Right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's a model. It's a model of value. And if we look deeper at Bitcoin, we can start to look deeper at value itself. What is value? What is it? Like, what does that mean? What do human beings truly, what are they willing to spend their time and energy to acquire or to do?
Right.
And, you know, Bitcoin being digital gold, which we'll talk with Chris DeRose about, even getting into the idea of like, why, if we can understand why Bitcoin is valuable, then maybe we can understand why gold is valuable, not in the other direction.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of people who are like, well, Bitcoin is valuable because it's a model of gold. And I was one of the people who thought that at first.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
Because it shares the properties. But it's like, no. It just so happens that gold fit a model of value that already existed in the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin is just not dealing with the rock. It's just a model of the human mind. It's a model of human value. And so when we start looking at it that way, then we can see that, like, well, then what's going to come out of it is necessarily, if we can start to look at it and see, wow, this is going to be about, well, value first. It's going to be about really emotion, psychology, more than anything, communication. Right? We're going to get to see what works in terms of human communication as we try to navigate creating the most valuable form. Because that's what everybody's going for, right? All
Absolutely.
of these blockchain wars, all of these things, it's all about everybody wants to make what they're holding more valuable.
Valuable.
Right? That's the goal. The goal is, and I think a lot of people sometimes forget that, that regardless of whether or not you agree with what the person on the other side or the other blockchain thinks is valuable, at the end of the day, their intention is the same as yours.
Yep.
They want to find the pathway that will lead to the most value. They think it's a different pathway than you do. But that doesn't mean that some people now, and I've watched this in this bear market where it's weird that the charts of almost all the currencies are almost exactly the same, and yet there are people gloating that because, I guess misery loves company, because it's like, yeah, I see this on the BTC side, I'm watching all these altcoins going down, almost going to zero, and it's like, that looks like exactly your same chart. Like, it's the same chart. It's the same chart. So if you're watching this coin drop 15%, you're also watching yourself drop 10 to 15%. I don't know that you want to be gloating about that. And but that's also for us to see, like, oh wow, look at how weird of little monkeys we are.
Right.
Where okay, so maybe we don't all want, maybe gaining value in ours isn't really what we find valuable. Maybe we find just as much value in someone else suffering. We suffer, they suffer. Misery loves company. That's a cliche. It's an axiom. We don't say that for no reason whatsoever.
Yep.
So this gives us a chance to really, really look at that. Okay? So one of the things that is, I think, it's talked about, but it's rarely looked at in this vein that I'm talking about as not a technological issue, but a human issue.
Right.
And I want to look at it today. We're going to look at it in the first hour, and I think it's really going to lead into our talk with Chris DeRose, because he recently put forward something that was very much a human issue, a proposal for Bitcoin Core to have a mission statement about who are we, what do we stand for. And you would think that would be non-controversial.
Right.
You would think that that would be something where it's like, oh, okay. It was highly controversial. People saying that Chris wanted to institute a government and all of this for a mission state.
Wow.
And we're going to talk about why he thinks that might be. That seems that is yet again something where it's like, huh, that's unexpected. Maybe we should look at that. That's a human issue.
Wow.
So, go ahead.
It's interesting, man, because I've been doing some stuff in Vegas the last, I would say, like 2 weeks or so, and I came across a couple revelations because I'm working with a new client now who's a quantum physicist, and what a lot of the things that she was saying and a lot of things that I've been studying before. So this is interesting that we're having this conversation right now because we're looking at the human element with psychology and culture inside of the Bitcoin technology. But also the Bitcoin technology and technologies that are on the internet are now, I'm learning, can be extended outside of the internet.
Sure.
With understanding quantum physics and the way energy works and things of that nature. So as above, so below, as within, so without. If there's an internet, there's also an outernet. And those things that we understand on the Bitcoin like technology side can also be applied to human technology, understanding thoughts and connecting frequencies and things of that nature. So it's interesting that we're having this conversation right now about, you know, the human element, the thought process, and the understanding cultures and schisms and things of that nature inside of technology.
Well, one thing to always remember is that all of these things are designed by human brains, right? So software is the logic that is written within software. Well, one, it's human brains that write the software, that thought of the software in the first place, and that even thought up the languages, the software languages, and the hardware that it's running on. Right? So we're already simulating human brains, but then there's this interesting reflexivity, right?
Yeah.
And we see that with social media, to where, okay, humans created social media, created MySpace and Facebook and Friendster, and I was a professional software developer in the social media space at the time when all of these things were happening. There were lots of social media platforms at the time that were startups, you know what I mean? I was working for a lot of them. And so nobody knew what it was going to become. But now people are organizing their meat space life, their carbon life, based upon what's happening on social media. Based upon what's happening in the ones and zeros.
Right. So it's a mirror. It's like it's crazy.
Well, and not just a mirror, but it's reflexivity, that it's like a feedback loop, a boop 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 boop. So we watch. Here you have the creation of Bitcoin. Then you have the creation of a Bitcoin culture. But the Bitcoin culture determines what the software of Bitcoin is going to be next. And then that software then leads to another iteration of the culture. So you have, as Chris DeRose says, programming the silicon and programming the carbon, but which came first?
Right.
Because we are products of our technology, but our culture is a product of our technology.
Right.
But our technology is a product of our culture.
What came first, the chicken or the egg?
Right. And so so I think that this is important to talk about, and it's going to actually lead us into perfect jumping off point, because before we get into the Byzantine generals problem, to sort of show the state of Bitcoin governance as it is, and I think what we might call the state of nature when it's working correctly. There's a lot of examples of when it's working incorrectly, right? But I want to bring up an example of when it's working correctly because it's something that just happened today, and I want to take my hat off and just say kudos to Calvin Ayre, who's the head of CoinGeek, As I've said on this show, I got a chance in Hong Kong to interact with Calvin. Actually had a very nice lunch one of the afternoons. He made a little invite of the speakers. It was at the table. It was myself, Roger Veer, Calvin, Amari Sachet, who we've had on the show, Joannis Vermorel, who we've had on the show. We had a nice long, about an hour and a half over several courses of a great meal, had a nice long discussion. That was my first time interacting with Calvin, seeing what type of a person he was. I didn't know, obviously, he's a online gambling billionaire. Sometimes it's hard to know with these individuals, okay, so here you are in Bitcoin. I found him to be thoughtful, generous. I thought that, I could really, you can tell when people are listening and taking something in and get it, and then they're able to continue the conversation on and the particular questions that they're asking. And a couple of times, things with Joannis and Amari got pretty high level, and he was right there. So I'm like, okay, this dude's not just a money man, like he's about it, right? So he's somebody to really pay attention to. And then, of course, the entire event was fantastic. His generosity in terms of everything and classiness, fantastic. Now, as anybody who sort of follows things knows, there is a connection between CoinGeek and nChain. I think perhaps the best way to categorize that is that, CoinGeek is sort of the capital entity that helps to make these things happen, and nChain is doing more on the ground in terms of investing in companies. And there is perhaps individuals or an individual associated with nChain who are not quite as mature and adults as Calvin. And so sometimes I think those lines can get crossed. But I think today there are clear examples that CoinGeek, as led by Calvin Ayre, who now have acquired quite a significant amount of hash power, something like almost a quarter of the hash power on Bitcoin Cash is CoinGeek. It's very impressive. He put out a statement today that I was like, okay, there is definitely, he is in charge of this thing, thoughtful, an adult, and I'm actually looking forward to what they'll do. And I just wanted to share some of this because it's interesting, because it goes along with, over the last couple of months, some things that we've brought up on the show for people who have been watching. And it goes to show how, in a decentralized way, how governance works and how people make decisions and the best and smart ways to make decisions. And it goes directly, it's so crazy because it's directly related to the Byzantine generals problem, which has always been presented as a computer science problem that proof of work and that Bitcoin solves technologically. But what we actually see here is the Byzantine generals problem being solved by humans in human affairs, because it's about decision making. It's about how do you make the right decision. That's fundamentally what the Byzantine generals problem is all about. How do you make the right decision in an environment where there are individuals who do not want you to make the right decision for whatever reason?
Interesting.
That's what the Byzantine generals problem is. That's the ultimate question, and we'll get into it exactly. So basically, here's what happened, and this will be a great starting off point as an example. Throw up this Calvin thing. So there's a statement from Calvin Ayre and CoinGeek about Bitcoin protocol. Starts out like this. CoinGeek is committed to global success of the original Bitcoin, now restored in the form of Bitcoin Cash BCH, and that requires restoring the Bitcoin protocol to its original design. Once restored, the Bitcoin protocol should be locked so that businesses and developers around the world can reliably build on top of it, just as they do on the Internet protocol. This will help professionalize the Bitcoin ecosystem to enable its next stage of growth. In keeping with these goals, here is a statement of consensus changes that CoinGeek, as a significant miner, will support in the November 2018 protocol upgrade. So every 6 months there's a protocol upgrade. In other words, there's a hard fork of BCH. This is something that has been planned. The CoinGeek weeks, the CoinGeek conferences are actually scheduled around these events. So the first thing is basically they support adding in more of the opcodes. What opcodes are is they're the scripting language of Bitcoin. They enable you to put more restrictions, and to basically program, in a nutshell, they allow you to more effectively program money. It makes Bitcoin truly programmable money right on the blockchain. And then removing the limit of the number of opcodes that you can have, so the length of the little script. Not necessarily like a smart contract. It's not Turing complete, but it enables you to do a great many things like that. And raising the maximum block size to 128 megs. So that's from 32. Then he says, we note that additional changes have been proposed by several implementation teams that are not, underlined, part of the original Bitcoin protocol. We will not support the following changes or commit our hash power to running software that implements them. One is a new opcode that was not in the original opcodes. So in the original Bitcoin client, there are a whole bunch of opcodes. It's got a really robust scripting language as compared to what Core has now, a lot of which has been disabled. And then the other thing is a transaction ordering system called canonical transaction ordering that was actually first proposed in a paper by Johannes Vermorel, who we've had on the show. Says, in the longer term, CoinGeek will continue to support only consensus changes that restore the original Bitcoin protocol, and those that may be demonstrated as absolutely necessary to meet the goal of massive on-chain scaling and terabyte blocks. This can be broadly summarized as removing all of the artificially imposed limits and restoring previously disabled functionality where safe to do so, etc., etc. As we previously announced, CoinGeek believes in miner choice and healthy competitive marketplace for miners. So, then they say, here's some non-consensus changes. So these are some changes that they will support. CoinGeek is committed to enabling massive on-chain scaling and safe instantaneous Bitcoin transactions. As such, we will be encouraging the non-consensus changes that meet these requirements. Specifically, we encourage the following. Removing transaction relay delays, so delays between moving transactions as they're received between nodes. Plug-in transaction selection and quotation modules to enable miners to control fee policies more easily. For example, 1. Free or cheaper fees for transactions that either shrink or do not expand the UTXO set. Storage or computational cost-based fee calculation. The most important thing here, go to this free TX. This is actually the part that I wanted to get to. Free or cheaper fees for transactions that either shrink or do not expand the UTXO set. Now, this is why I say, you can come back to us, Christian, because I want to explain so that we don't get into the weeds. There were basically two things. Go to this initiative thing. So there was a show. This was our show on June 11th, 2018, in Economics We Trust with Joel Valenzuela, where we talked about this Miner's Choice initiative that had been brought up by CoinGeek, along with another initiative. And this was after a sort of a very contentious situation that happened that ended up with me getting blocked by Craig Wright for asking some questions about, like, how are you going to do... Basically, the Miner's Choice said, we want to give free Bitcoin transactions, some certain amount of them. And I was like, how are you going to do this? And no answer. And then the conversation went on, and what people came up with was, well, we could do it by if it's like old coins that have been there for a long time, because otherwise, potentially, somebody's able to do a very inexpensive attack, right? Then, still, I'm like, wow, how do we do this? We had Johannes Vermorel on, right? So go to this Vermorel. So we had him on, and I asked him, should we have free transactions? And he said, hell yes. But here's the thing. Yes, on the coin age, which we had already talked about. But also, any transaction that shrinks the UTXO set should be free. Okay, so Christian, you can come back to us. I just want to explain for the people. You could go and check out this Johannes Vermorel thing, but basically this is how it works. At any given time on the blockchain, what's really important, what most applications need to see, what most nodes need to see, and applications need to see, is they don't need to see your whole history. It's just like your bank account, right? You don't need to see your whole history all the time.
Right.
You may need it for certain things. What do you need to see? What's important at any given time?
The transaction.
Well, your balance.
Right.
right? Like that's what's the most important thing. Like if you're a merchant or if it's your ATM card, what do they really need to know? They need to know, do you have enough money on this to be
Right.
able to do this? What is your balance? Now, on Bitcoin, the global idea of the available balance, like who does the current money belong to? Never mind who mined it in the past. Never mind how it's moved through the blockchain. We've got a record of that. But what's important for everyday, day-to-day transactions are what's called the unspent transaction outputs. That basically, in a nutshell, it's your existing balance. It's the existing balance that is in every address. Okay? Now, what makes up that existing balance, you might say, are like in your bank account, all the credits, right? So every time you get a credit, it increases your balance. Those are what you have to spend. Then you can spend it, right? So if I send you $100, let's say I send you $100 via Venmo, and it shows up in your bank account. Now that's an unspent transaction output. Now you're able to spend it. You turn it into an input when you then spend it at the grocery store, right? So the way that Bitcoin works, though, that's different than a bank is, with the bank, they're just keeping the ledger themselves, but the money itself they're a custodian of it. They're keeping it in their own bank account. Then when you need it, they just basically transfer the ones and zeros around and they send it from bank to bank, right? And these banks send back and forth those amounts, and then they settle. Like every 30 days, they'll be like, oh, you owe us this amount or you owe us this amount. In Bitcoin, it's very different. Every single one of those inputs that comes to, or the outputs that comes to you exists as its own. So if I send you $100, your balance now consists of one transaction with $100. Your balance consists of one UTXO of $100. But if I send you 100 times, I send you $1, your balance now consists of 100 UTXOs of $1.
Gotcha.
Understand what I'm saying? That's how Bitcoin is a little bit different in that way. So then if you want to spend, let's say, $20, you would spend 20 of those UTXOs. Or if you had the 100, you would just spend one. So what ends up happening is that you have differences in the number of UTXOs that you have to spend, and then how you can send it out to as many different addresses as you want.
Right.
So that may be that you send it, generally, you send it to the person that you're sending it to, and then you send whatever's left to what's called a change address. You take the change back. So what is being suggested here, which is smart, is the resources that are required for miners and for nodes to validate the blockchain and for them to validate transactions, the amount of resources that they need goes up the more total UTXOs there are, right? So they would prefer that you had that one UTXO for $100 rather than you had those 100 UTXOs for $1.
Gotcha.
It's better for the miners. It's better for their profitability if you have just the one. So as Johannes Vermorel said, well, of course, you're doing a service for the network if you take your 100 UTXOs and you convert them into one, either by sending somebody money or you convert them into two even. That's great. So that should be free.
I see.
Right? That makes sense. The thing is, that never came up in that initial, over the course of 6 days. No one said it. I had not heard it said until Johannes Vermorel said it on this show. Now, if you go and you look at what was in the initiative itself, go to this initiative. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go to the miners. So this was the Miners' Choice Initiative that was on June 5th. This was what I had a bit of an issue with, where I was like, what's the deal here? Could not get any answers. Perhaps I asked the wrong person. Perhaps I shouldn't have asked Craig Wright, because perhaps it wasn't Craig Wright's initiative to start with. Maybe that's what we're learning. Let's go to this MC thing. So basically, this was what was initially in there. It was remove the current dust limit of 546 satoshis, so like that's a minimum amount that you have to send in a transaction. You'll notice that Calvin Ayre did not bring that up in his statement. So I'm thinking that maybe they've abandoned that. Great. And then 2, accept some free zero mining fee transactions in each block they mine. CoinGeek and nChain believe that miners should be able to accept free transactions rather than requiring users to pay a minimum of 1 satoshi per byte. Their mining firms will each designate a number of free transactions they will accept in each mined block. So you can come back to us. So that has now been changed from just, yes, there should just be some free and miners will just decide which ones those are, to no, we're not going to talk about the dust limit, but what we do support is shrinking the UTXO set. So for me, what this says is what you initially had, and this is why I say this is on a broad. So we just went into the weeds a little bit, right? And
yep.
But let's go back out of the weeds and look at this at a high level view of of how this is productive, right? How it's productive is you put out an idea or an initiative. Here's what we want to do. Okay? Now it's one thing and not productive and not actually taking advantage of all of the resources that you have in terms of all of the brains. Like, this is the thing about open source.
Yeah.
Linus's law, which Eric S. Raymond wrote about in the book The Cathedral and the Bazaar, the law is, what makes open source so powerful is, Linus's law, which is named after Linus Torvalds, the inventor of Linux, right, is with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. What does that mean? It means if you have enough people looking at a particular issue, to someone, every single bug, every problem will be immediately obvious. Because it's like, if you have one person looking at it, you have a blind spot. But his idea is, if you can get all the eyes looking 360 around, it's like having eyes all the way around your head, then you have no blind spots. What's interesting about that idea of eyes all the way around the head, the Babylonian hero Marduk, who's like the first hero, that was one of the things they said about him. He had eyes all the way around his head, and he could speak magic words.
Interesting.
They were talking about Linus's law in Babylon.
Yeah. Crazy.
They knew that what was valuable was to have a 360 perspective on an issue. Their great hero had eyes all the way around his head. So what's interesting in this scenario and what's great is, like, we actually have eyes all the way around our head. It's called the Bitcoin community. How you use this, Calvin used it perfectly. He said, here's what I would like to do. Here's what I would like to see. Here's an initiative. The community discussed. It was a raucous discussion. There were a lot of enemies made in making that in having that discussion. But a lot of people made it in the best of faith, because a lot of people made it, myself included, with the goal of trying to have the most safe, secure, and valuable network that we possibly could. Why? Because my business, just like Calvin's business, receives all of its revenue in BCH. I have no other desire than to see the price of BCH go up. That's what I'm ideologically aligned with. Just like him. And so what do you see? You see, this discussion goes on, and instead of just sticking to the initial initiative, after thought, I told you he's a thoughtful dude. I told you he listens. I got that from him. I got that. You don't make $1 billion by being dumb.
Seriously.
And by not having eyes all the way around your head. So that's why I say kudos to him. This statement that he made, I agree pretty much. I have not really gotten into the weeds on the things that they disagree with, but what I do know is that Bitcoin right now is working pretty good. And so I don't see a reason to necessarily support these things at this time. What I advise is fork it off, work on that code, fork it off, and see if anybody will mine it. There's nothing preventing the people who are developing that from forking it off. Fork it off that way and see if anybody will mine it. And if they'll mine it, then good to go. And I'm sure that over time, Calvin would move over to it too.
Yep.
So I just wanted to throw a shout out to him, and also to just be like, that's how it can work right. To me, that's a decentralized, voluntarist. This is how the free market can work right.
Yeah.
If we
absolutely.
take advantage of the minds of everybody around us who is ideologically and economically aligned with us, all bugs are shallow. We can come up with all the solutions.
Great.
Which leads us straight away to the Byzantine generals problem. And we'll blow through this, and I think it will make sense to a lot of people about the Byzantine generals problem. So, Byzantine generals problem. Before we get into the exact description of it, let's talk about what is a Byzantine general in the first place, right? Let's start with that. So, Byzantium, that is the name for the Eastern Roman Empire. This is when Emperor Constantine, who was the person who made Christianity the official religion of Rome, established his capital at Constantinople, which is now Istanbul in Turkey. So this is about like 400 AD. Basically the guy who the Western Roman Empire falls apart, like in that next 100 years. Western Roman Empire, which is based in Rome, basically falls apart. Constantinople, aka Byzantium, becomes the leading power. So pull up this Justinian. Justinian is probably the most well-known. He's sort of the Julius Caesar of Byzantium. It was during his reign that the empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, became the largest. It lasted all the way until the 1400s. So we're talking about a 1,000-year-long empire. If you want to pop into this empire thing, Christian, you want to roll into this empire. So this is what we're looking at, 555 AD. I mean, we're talking about from Egypt all the way through, the Middle East, Arabia, where Israel is, into Turkey, all of Greece, all of Italy, most of northern Africa, southern Spain, Morocco around the Gibraltar area, everything, all the islands in the Mediterranean. This belonged to the Byzantine Empire in around 555 AD. So let's go to this soldiers thing. You can get an idea of what a Byzantine battlefield would look like. This is the Emperor Heraclius at the Battle of Nineveh, a depiction in 627 AD. So they were in control. These are the Romans, but a different kind of Roman. These are the Christian Romans. As you see, he's carrying the cross, the standard of Christ on the cross. This is the religion that is the Eastern Orthodox religion. So the Greek Orthodox, your Russian Orthodox comes from out of this. You'll notice that time frame there. This is also the Muslims came up, and it was the Caliphate that actually really put a dent into the Byzantine Empire. The Muslim armies laid siege to Constantinople a significant number of times, but they just could not take Constantinople, which is where the Byzantine generals problem comes in, because it's all about, and why it's important that these are Byzantine era generals, because what was so important at that time technologically was the building of cities and city walls and fortifications that armies simply could not cross, that they could siege for years and years and years. And that's what the Byzantine generals problem is about. So go to this problem. So here is the fundamentals of the problem. You've got a whole bunch of Byzantine generals, and they are trying to lay siege to a city, to like a major, this is a major city. And the idea is this, that if they have the people who are watching can see this, you have a whole bunch of generals surrounding the city. If they can lead a coordinated attack, they'll win. If they have an uncoordinated attack, they'll lose. Which means that fundamentally this problem is a communications problem. Let's go to the it comes from a 1982 paper. Go ahead and go to this. So this is the Byzantine generals problem. This is a paper from ACM Transactions on Programming Languages and Systems, Volume 4, Number 3, July 1982. This is the game theory problem that is the most important to Bitcoin. It's what Bitcoin solves. If you want to go back to the problem, just so that we can give an idea of why this is important to Bitcoin. Why this is important to Bitcoin is that the coordinated attack, what that is basically the correct ledger. The idea is what makes Bitcoin valuable is that it's an immutable, distributed ledger, meaning it's an unchangeable ledger that is the same across every single miner that's mining. That's what makes it valuable, and that it can't be changed. An uncoordinated attack, that is, some people attacking, some people retreating, that is, we don't know what that ledger is. Clearly, some miners have one, they've followed some other ledger, some have followed another ledger, and then some are doing the attacking. So this is the idea. How do we figure out a way, even if there are perhaps traitors in the midst, that everybody will end up following the same course of action? Okay, so go back to the paper. Byzantine generals problem. They describe the problem here. It says, we imagine that several divisions of the Byzantine army are camped outside an enemy city, each division commanded by its own general. The generals, The generals can communicate with one another only by messenger. After observing the enemy, they must decide upon a common plan of action. However, some of the generals may be traitors, trying to prevent the loyal generals from reaching agreement. Okay, so Christian, come back. We'll just roll through that. Basically, the idea is very, very simple. They're sieging a city. They need to all decide on a course of action. But most important in this is the way that they've chosen to decide on this course of action is democratically. All right? They're going to basically try to communicate to each other their votes. Right. So they can only communicate by messenger. So imagine the scenario that you're stuck in, right? Mm-hmm. You can't what the best thing to do would be to all get together around a table and say yes, no, count it up, right? Okay, but they're prevented from doing that. They have to communicate via messenger, that's the simulation of a computer network, right? You have to communicate across the network. So they have to communicate by messenger, and they have to figure out a method for communicating by messenger whereby they can get everybody else's vote, and they can be assured that they are getting the legit vote from that person.
Right.
That they're getting the true message. And then they look at it, and they themselves count up the votes, and instead of receiving an order, they take the result of that as the order. So If they count it up and 51% say attack, they attack. If they count it up and 51% say retreat, or a majority say retreat, they retreat. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so then let's go to condition A. So the generals must have, this is back to the paper, the generals must have an algorithm to guarantee that A, all loyal generals decide upon the same plan of action. The loyal generals will do what the algorithm says they should, but the traitors may do anything they wish. The algorithm must guarantee condition A regardless of what the traitors do. That is, all loyal generals decide upon the same plan of action. The loyal generals should not only reach agreement, but should agree upon a reasonable plan, We therefore also want to ensure that, this is B, condition B, a small number of traitors cannot cause the loyal generals to adopt a bad plan. Okay, so come back to us. So what are we, so it's a pretty human situation that
Right.
it's like, okay, the loyal generals, what we want to make sure, there are some traitors. Those traitors may dip out. They may leave. But what we want to ensure, or if it says retreat, they may attack. Like, we don't know. We don't know what they'll do. They could do anything. But the loyal ones, what we want to ensure is that all of the loyal ones will do the same thing. We're actually a lot less concerned with what it is that they do. What we're concerned with is that they all do the same thing.
Interesting.
Okay? It doesn't matter what it is, it just matters that all the loyal ones all do the same thing. Which could also mean that they could actually all get the wrong message.
And do the wrong thing.
But they all do the wrong thing, but that would be the right thing.
Right.
Because what we want, how they win, is by all the loyal generals doing the same thing. Okay? Then the second thing we want to ensure is that just a small number of traitors can't cause the loyal generals to not all do the same thing. So it's like, we want to make sure that we have a system where it's like, if there's one or two traitors, no problem. Now, if there's a ton of traitors, problem. But we want to ensure that that we could have as many traitors. We would call this fault tolerance, right? We want to make sure that there are that you could have not just that one simple traitor can't destroy the whole plan. We want to make sure that if you want to destroy the whole plan, you better have a lot of conspiracy. There better be a huge conspiracy of traitors, right? Okay. So then it goes to like sort of show what this looks like, because the generals have to communicate all of this stuff to their lieutenants. So here we've got a little graph here. Okay. So what they figured out when they looked at it, go to lieutenant. Here it is. Byzantine general's problem. A commanding general must send an order to his lieutenant general such that all the loyal generals obey the same order. If the commanding general is loyal, then every loyal lieutenant obeys the order he sends. Okay, let's look a little deeper at that. So now, Christian, we've taken it to even another level. All right? So you can come back to us. So here's what we've got. You've got your general. Generals may be loyal or they may be traitors. But you've also got lieutenants. And some of the lieutenants may be traitors. So the general gives out an order. If the lieutenant's loyal, he'll follow the general's order. If the lieutenant's a traitor, he won't. So go to this traitor commander. So this is what it looks like if the general is a traitor, right? So if the general is a traitor, what will the general do? He'll send different instructions to different lieutenants. That's what a traitorous general will do. So we see here Lieutenant 1, Lieutenant 2, and then the commander. And what we have is the lieutenants also communicating with each other. So then you've got the commander says to Lieutenant 2, he says retreat. To Lieutenant 1, he says attack. Lieutenant 2 says to Lieutenant 1, retreat. He said retreat. But what you have in this situation is you've got Lieutenant 2 retreating. You've got Lieutenant 1 attacking. Attack overrides retreat because the lieutenant doesn't override the commander. Right? So he's like, so they're ranked in a hierarchy here. The commander's a traitor. What do you end up with? You end up with Lieutenant 1 attacking, Lieutenant 2 retreating. So then go to, what if the traitors are lieutenants? What does this look like? The commander says attack to both of them. Lieutenant 2 says, oh, he said retreat to Lieutenant 1, and Lieutenant 2 takes off. And Lieutenant 1 attacks. That's bad. That's not what we want. So either of those is a bad situation. If the commander is a traitor, Lieutenant 2 retreats. If the commander is loyal but Lieutenant 2 is a traitor, Lieutenant 2 retreats away. Okay, so how does Bitcoin solve these? Basically two ideas. One is signed. We do signed messages. So we're looking here of how these signed messages work. Basically, the way that they describe it is something like you would go and they say, it doesn't matter how you do it. Maybe you take a stack of these votes and you sign them. So the commander would sign them, or he'd put a seal on it. Right? That's how you know, it's definitely from this commander. And then when it comes to somebody else, if they're going to pass it on, they basically put theirs on top and put their seal. So what you can see in this case is the commander is disloyal. He says attack to Lieutenant 1. He says retreat to Lieutenant 2. Then Lieutenant 2 sends over what he got from the commander, signed, to Lieutenant 1, and Lieutenant 1 does the same. They exchange back, and then they're both able to say, we've got different messages from the commander. And they both say, the commander is a traitor.
Oh, shit.
Because they both communicate with each other. This is what signed messages help you to figure out, because you're like, this person's the traitor. So that's good. So Bitcoin uses cryptographically signed transactions and messages. What's the other thing that you do? Go to this graph thing. Well, the other thing, and this is important, and we'll get into, this is the human side of it. What they said is that you want to have your communication be done in such a way that you can basically get other opinions from people. They call this a 3 regular graph. That essentially what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to have communication with somebody or two people, if at all possible, who don't share connections with each other. Like, so if you're connected to 3 people, you don't want them to all have the same connections to one another. You don't want messages to pass through like one focal point. You never want that. You see 2 graphs here. The other one has messages passing through this sort of center focal point. You never want to have a point where if that person screws up the message, if that person's a traitor, it messes everything up. So this is about creating a level of communication. You can come back to us, because now we can kind of get into what this means. Like, how is looking at that helpful to us to understand? One of the things to understand about this is, like, let's take it to the human element of why this would be taking place. I think that's very important. Like, why would one of these generals want, or more precisely, why would he want to screw the vote up? Why would he want to make the vote look different? Right? I don't think it's just because he's a traitor. I don't think that's really the case. I don't think that's how it always goes down. So it's like, you imagine, here are all these generals. They're Byzantine generals. They're Roman generals. If you're a Roman general, what you're after is glory.
Right.
Imagine that really the best decision for everybody would be retreat. But you feel yourself that there's at least a chance. And regardless, if you attack, then at least there would be some glory in it for you. Just off your own self-interest. You're not really, I mean, in a way, because you think that that's probably not the right decision, or what you believe is that, or what you're seeing as the messages come in, is that everybody else is voting for retreat. But you really believe in attack. So you want to convince everybody else that everybody else said attack.
Yeah, right.
To get what you want. Now, I'm not convinced, when you look at the Byzantine generals problem, that we're really talking about a traitor. I think that may be the wrong choice of terms. And I think it may be because these are computer scientists not thinking, why would Byzantine generals be doing this in the first place? Now, the other thing is, it may be that maybe attacking and retreating are equal in your mind, but let's say one of the other generals is a rival of yours. And let's say you know that you're going to get beat attacking, or you know that you're going to win attacking, but in particular, you know his unit will be wiped out. So you would vote for the one that did that. Or perhaps it's that attacking is really the right move, you will definitely win, but the position that they have you in is a support position. You're not going to be the one who's going to storm the walls and take the castle inside. If that's been assigned to somebody else because of the particular angle they've got on it, you're just going to be in a support position outside the walls the whole time, making sure that no one escapes or something like that.
Wow.
Might you instead try to make everybody retreat so that the next time you could come back and you could have the glory?
Yep.
So the Byzantine generals problem, just as with what it solves in Bitcoin, which is a double spend, is really about individual self-interest. And what it also says is that is known from the start of the problem. Because if any one individual had all the information, they wouldn't be trying to solve the problem this way. If any one of the generals was best to make the decision, they wouldn't be voting. The whole purpose of voting is the idea that no one person knows best, that human beings are fallible, and that it is much smarter to trust the wisdom of a group of qualified individuals than to simply rely on the opinion of a single individual, no matter how qualified that individual is, because you can never know what their self-interest is.
Right.
You can never know for sure that that individual has the best interest of the entire army and operation at heart. And it also indicates another thing. It indicates that those individuals who value getting information from the widest number of people before making a decision are those individuals who truly have the best interest of the operation at heart.
Right.
Which goes right to Calvin. Which is exactly why I say that's somebody who is truly trying to take advantage of the Byzantine generals' solution.
Very interesting.
Don't just rely on one point of information, no matter how experienced or qualified that person appears to be, because you never know what is really in their heart. That the wisdom of crowdsourcing something, the wisdom of paying attention to Linus's law, that with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. That's how we can succeed, and that's how we can grow quickly in this whole thing. And that's why, and this is why I'm like, these are the models. These are the models that are laid out, but the model that is behind Bitcoin in the first place, the Byzantine generals problem, is a human problem. Byzantine generals are human beings trying to solve a human problem. They aren't computers. Those computers are modeled after the minds of human beings, and the networks that we create are going to run into the same issues that we as human beings have ran into for millennia.
Crazy.
It's a trip. It's a trip.
Yeah.
I think it also leads us directly into our next guest, because he's someone who has recognized this for a long time, and I've been following him and his work because of that. And he recently had a bit of a scandal regarding that, and I'm pretty excited to talk to Chris DeRose. So let's actually let me see. Let me make sure that he's hanging out. He's not. Oh, he is. Haha! I see him. Hey, Chris. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and go to break, and then we will be back with Chris DeRose.
Tailored by Christian Rays. The spirit of art. The spirit of technology. The spirit of individuality. Baby Vodka. An ultra-premium spirit conceived by Vin Armani. Handcrafted and distilled in Las Vegas by master distiller George Rotz. Each bottle, a celebration of the individual, custom engraved and hand-signed by the creators. Each element blending in harmony to create a beautiful experience beyond imagination. Baby Vodka, the spirit of Vegas. Created by Vin Armani. Tailored by Christian Rays. Available for purchase exclusively with cryptocurrency at babyvodka.com.
Welcome back to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/VinArmani. Also on Twitter and Periscope at Vin Armani is my handle there. We're proud members of the Activist Post Podcast Network, so you can check out all of our audio archives by visiting activistpost.com. As well, you can check us out on the Liberty Radio Network. That's at lrn.fm. Liberty Radio Network broadcasts on dozens of terrestrial radio stations, also satellite, and of course streaming online. That's at lrn.fm. Well, before we get to our guest, just want to talk a little bit about Counter Markets. Counter Markets Trends and Strategies for Maximum Freedom. Our new issue is out. So if you have not gotten your free issue, you can go and do that at countermarkets.com. My article this month is The Case Against QR. I think it's time for us to move beyond that particular user interface and talked a little bit about NFC. Of course, had to throw in a little plug for CoinText. But I do think that, again, it's like Linus's Law. With enough eyeballs looking at this thing, man, I think that there are a lot of different ways that we can move this thing forward. So, with that, countermarkets.com, Trends and Strategies for Maximum Freedom. Go get your first issue for free. We do take PayPal and not just cryptocurrency. We also take credit cards for the subscription. But go and check it out first. So, with that, and speaking of trying to move things forward and getting a lot of eyeballs looking at the current issues in Bitcoin, we may as well get to our guest, Mr. Chris DeRose. Chris DeRose is a Bitcoin evangelist, public speaker, podcaster, and journalist. He's the host of DeRose Uncensored, a wide-ranging and insightful look at the people, projects, and culture of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. Chris DeRose, welcome back to the Vin Armani Show.
Thanks for having me, Vin. What's up, party people? Let's get this started.
Okay, so you have been, I want to jump right into it, dude, because I think that we've got a whole hour, right? Yeah. You've been very controversial as of late, more controversial than you normally have been. I don't know if you caught our first hour talking about the human elements and the reflection that they have within the software, the sort of the back and forth. You came on the show. We talked about the sort of religious aspects, the cultural aspects. Maybe if we could just start out, maybe we could just start out by talking about what it is that you did recently, and maybe if you could tell us why you did it, and then I think we have a broader discussion that we'll go over for the hour. So, Chris DeRose, why are so many people mad at you in the world of Bitcoin right now?
Man, there's always something. And I'm not innocent. I start these things, but I start them with reasons. So what was the principal issue was that I submitted a PR to bitcoincore.org, proposing a renovated About Us page that included a mission statement. It really is the primary renovation. And discussions were had. Frankly, prejudices were thrown, and the issue was censored, dismissed, and otherwise covered up at that point. And there's a little bit more nuance to it, but I had a strong suspicion that's kind of where we would end up with it. I thought it was important that we kind of entered into the zeitgeist and interface for discussion on the matter. And there's a few reasons why this is like a really pivotal time in the relationships for all Bitcoiners to have, but principally between Bitcoin Core and the community.
Why is a mission statement? Why is a mission statement important for? Well, okay. First, let's get into this idea. Okay, now this is a mission statement for Bitcoin Core specifically. Being Bitcoin Core being the implementation that is, I guess you could say, the most direct descendant from the initial code put out by Satoshi. Why? First off, why do you think they don't have a mission statement? Maybe that's the first good question.
Right, so that is the first good question. There is a rather interesting reason, and the reason is roughly this. The rock chain, the digital gold meme, is seemingly expiring. It is becoming a bit shameful now that postmodernism awareness is, I think, upon us, and people are of the belief that there is a shame to being associated with the fetishization of a rock, which probably a reasonable concern. I think that there's a balance to it. But as that becomes a more pronounced public consideration, then Bitcoin Core is at a weird crossroad, because Bitcoin Core's identity was as the custodian of the rock. That's how they presented the public. This thing arrived. It is of immutable construction. It is not made by men. And frankly, what's interesting about a lot of this is that Roger Ver does get credit for having started this discussion in his own way prior. So Bitcoin has effectively married itself to this position that there are no men behind the curtains. It's a fact of the universe that this thing arose. And I think with the rise of the caveman meme, the Bitcoin caveman rock man meme, the Bitcoin carnivores, the question of like, well, what is exactly gold about Bitcoin? Is it that the princes of European history wore the Bitcoin upon their head? Is it the way that it glistens in the sun? Is it the 79 protons that it has in its nucleus? And the answer is probably just none of that. It's a nice meme to bootstrap this thing, but it's becoming unavoidable at this point that there are leaders. This is a very difficult word here. Leaders, and that people are subjecting themselves to leadership in Bitcoin, and so now we're at this weird point where Bitcoin Core could take stewardship over the pivot. Like, this power vacuum opened up, and Bitcoin Core could take it, but they seem to not want to. And when I submitted this PR, it was effectively forcing that question. It's like, are you going to take this? It's a power vacuum. And the answer was no, we won't take it. So now we're at this weird point where Bitcoin Cash can take that lead, and we can talk about how, or Bitcoin Core can do damage control and do the reactive thing, which is usually what happens. But in the meantime, the viewers of the show are going to be able to watch all kinds of hilarity as we see, like, these various Bitcoin proponents, the Bitcoin bulldogs, if you will, start to scrub their history and tell us how they never believed this was a rock. Watch. By this time next week, no one ever believed this was digital gold. No, we won't find anybody. It never happened.
Why do you... Okay, two questions. No. One question that I'm going to start with, because I do this far too often. So I'm going to try to be very interrogatory with you and not and try to lead this thing as best I can. What did this mission statement say? Because I think that's what most people would be like, well, maybe he's just Chris is a crazy person. Like, maybe he was trolling. What was it that the mission statement said, so that we can decide whether or not, or your proposed mission statement, where was it supposed to go? What did it say? So that we can decide whether or not you are a lunatic.
Right. So I borrowed heavily from tradition, particularly in the open source ethic, because I believe that the real identity that we should present, insofar as one can be had, is as a protocol in the vein of a academic standard. I believe that's compatible with the open source license that the developers project when they provide the code. So I borrowed a mission statement primarily from the Linux Foundation, which, as the steward of the Linux standard, would be appropriate at some level to apply to Bitcoin. And I borrowed it from there. And you'll notice that, like in the PR, there was never a consideration of any substantial objection to the statement itself, because the statement itself was like very rote. It was very universal, intentionally so. And it wasn't even mine, to be clear. But the problem, I think, was of substantiating any form of non-rock based consideration for the project. I think that would be like the actual understated or unstated premise. And people kind of didn't really know what to do, but they were happy to censor the issue. And that, frankly, I'm happy too, because now they're in this weird point where it's like, well, who gets to do the mission statement? Because if like Chris DeRose, who's like the stigmatized person, can provide the mission statement, then now it's like a double fail. Because like if they acknowledge, I think, that there's a mission, then Chris DeRose gets a victory. We can't have that. And if they don't acknowledge, I don't know what's going to happen. It's very exciting. But that's the gist.
How is it that... Oh, now I'm going to do two things. I lied. I'm going to do it because I always do. One, why do you think the digital gold meme, why do you feel that the digital gold meme is losing steam? And two, can you explain why having a mission statement or acknowledging that a mission statement is appropriate is logically inconsistent with Bitcoin being digital gold?
Yeah, so the first one is probably postmodern awareness is becoming a little bit more prevalent. I don't actually think postmodernism is bad, but it needs to be done to a healthy degree. And so Jordan Peterson took the national stage and told everybody it was getting out of control, in part because in the 2016 elections, we had a flare-up in this like extreme sense, and I think that caused people to do some research on what the hell this postmodernism thing is. And there's like a lot of people who are like stalwart conservatives, like these Jerry Falwells of Bitcoin. Postmodernism is evil, it's bad. But meanwhile, like they don't know anything about it. So I think Jordan Peterson gets like so much credit for bringing awareness to this, but the way he presented it was in a certain form. And what I think people need to understand is that like we are of the postmodern generation in terms of millennials and even their parents. This movement started in the 60s. You can blame television if you'd like. Really, you can blame Nike. Nike kind of started or promoted a lot of this.
Just
and
do
you can
it,
see it,
that whole thing?
Say it again?
Just do it?
Well, Nike is the god of victory. And so like there's this notion in postmodernism of sign value, which is effectively like Veblen value, wherein if you wear this thing, your position in the hierarchy is greater. So
yes.
yeah. So like Nike sneakers were probably of equal construction to like Reebok at the time, and maybe even still today. But when you buy your Nike at a premium, you are receiving the blessings of the god Nike in your achievement of victory. And
wow.
And like a lot of people, yeah, right. So like a lot of people are like kind of like quick to like dismiss the SJWs for like this sort of like postmodernism thing. And it's true that they took it to an extreme degree. But what's also true is that like, okay, Seinfeld was, the joke on Seinfeld was effectively deconstruction. It was like a sort of exploration of deconstruction with Americans in a very public way. You also had this smash the patriarchy thing in the form of The Simpsons and The Family Guy, Married with Children, where the American dad was no longer this sort of like courageous bastion of the family, but was instead this bumbling idiot. And so like we had this to some degree in all of our lives. It doesn't make it bad per se. And in a lot of ways, like there's a good argument to be made that maybe the dollar is itself like a weird postmodern construct, because if you look at the dollar, it's very obvious that this sort of evolution of this thing has been like originally tethered to the real, to gold, perhaps. And then it became increasingly untethered to gold. And now we have like this piece of paper with weird memes on it that I guess we believe is value. So like we can have a huge discussion on that. But I think that there's a realization growing. And the way you really know that is through 4chan. Okay, just bear with me.
Go ahead.
4chan is the samizdat of America. I don't think people realize that. So when you look at 4chan, what you're looking at is are the ideas that we're having that we can't express. And so some of them are terrible and vulgar, and they shouldn't be expressed. I think everyone agrees. But then some of them are just kind of like, well, shit, you know, that's a weird loophole. Yeah, we can't say that. I don't know why. And so we're watching the caveman meme come out of 4chan, which tells me that the zeitgeist of the unthinkable is, in fact, a recognition of this postmodernity. And so I see that succeeding as well through like Biznatchi, who's doing a fantastic job of taking 4chan out onto like the normie world. And so these things are kind of like a confluence of events that are happening. And so like, you know how the news space works. Like when you see these big demographic shifts, you know there's a power vacuum opening up. And so like what I generally do is I'll be like, okay, well, a domino has to fall. I'll just tap it and see what happens. And people get mad at me for doing that, which is understandable. But like, I'm not the one who set the dominoes up. I'm just the one who like realized that somebody had to push it. So like, you know, that's your job as a journalist. You got to like hit the issue. And that's what I do. So this was one of those cases where everything just lined up and now we're set in motion.
So, how for Core do you think, and I'm sure that it's not even conscious, how for them do you think having this mission statement, where is the threat to the Rock? That's what I've been trying to wrap my head around. Like, how is it that a mission statement sort of decimates the Rock meme? Because I don't fully, they seem to get it because they're inside of it, but I don't think it's conscious. How does it decimate it?
Right. Okay, so this I was going to talk about this. This is really important. I want to talk about this on your show first because I think this is something the entire Bitcoin Cash community needs to consider. We are moving into the realm of the official. There is Bitcoin as a rock, Bitcoin Core, which is not Bitcoin, that is uncontentious, and there is Bitcoin official. We shouldn't say it as Bitcoin official. We should just say Bitcoin and then presume that there's an official Bitcoin. In the pursuit of the official, we should consider that Bcashers are those that say Bcash. That is what they are. And in the pursuit of the official, we then need to believe that there is a protocol and there is a spec and that there is a standard that makes it official. And in so doing, we need a cadence to a march. That is what the mission statement does in the making of official things. And what I would presume is that if we take this march on Bitcoin.com, the spec, the standard, the presentation of official would belong there. And in so doing, we would create this social fact of an official Bitcoin. And so that is effectively the power vacuum that's happened now. And I don't know who's going to command it. I'm going to probably get Roger on the show to kind of run some of this stuff through him. But it's really exciting times for that reason.
It's funny that you bring up Roger, and this is actually the first time that I've understood what you meant by Bitcoin as a march. In that, beating the drum to the, that's what you mean, right? Is that it's like there's got to be a cadence, a drum beat that everybody can follow. And I feel like if anybody, almost to a flaw, almost to a point, well, not almost to a point where he's engendered hate from those who are on a different chain than he supports, and at least a bit of annoyance from people like myself who think that maybe you should change up the talking points. But as you say, if Bitcoin is a march, Roger just droning on with the same, it's peer-to-peer cash, fast, reliable transactions. It's this, and it's the same thing over and over. But that's a march. Yeah. That's a march.
You can say a lot of things about Roger Ver, and I'll even be like, yeah, he's kind of like that, or he kind of does this. You can't say that he's a quitter at any point.
Right.
I'm not tolerating
that. True.
You know? So that should be recognized. And yeah, I think that we should kind of, as a community, take this opportunity to reboot, let all of the old prejudices die. Just say, look, we have rebooted. This is not a rock. That battle has been won or lost, no matter what side you're on. People want to validate their egos by receiving victories, and I get that. But the problem sometimes is that if we make the losers grovel at our feet, we lose their allegiance. So what I think we should be doing as a community is dropping this Bitcoin Cash, this Bitcoin Core. There's only Bitcoin. And I think that the people who most embellish the notion of a reboot will probably engender the most goodwill. The goal should be to get all of the Bitcoin developers to be exalted, I think, to be praised. I know that there's a lot of ill will in the past, but if we consider with a reboot that we would like to market to them the kindness that can be offered to them in their position, what we may find is that there's a lot of programmers who behind the scenes, they weren't so happy with the way that Bitcoin Core was going, and they made themselves join the march. And making them wear like a badge of shame or an apology isn't going to incentivize them to join the march. Instead, they should just be, I think, brought over with their existing place in the hierarchy. Let bygones be bygones. There's only Bitcoin now. Let's be wrong. Like, we were wrong. Now join us. Like, drop the ego issue. Whatever it takes for you to feel comfortable, that's okay, because in my mind, like, the power vacuum's over. So it's time for that.
So how do we... 'cause clearly, this is something that you've been thinking about. I mean, this is an interesting idea, and I think you're also absolutely right that if there was ever a time to do this, I think right now the most talented, I feel like a lot of the most talented developers right now are hanging out in a space where they're like, I don't know about the people who are necessarily, who most of them aren't even, I don't think, running their software, right? But are like those people who say that they are my supporters. I'm not altogether sure that they really even get it. How do we, or why should we, or is it even appropriate for us to try to discover what that Bitcoin should be, that official Bitcoin, that spec? And can you give us an idea of, like, what do you feel that spec encompasses?
Okay, so once we've gotten over the hurdle of Bitcoin not being a rock and being a process, that enables a whole bunch of things we can do. As it is currently, I think we should consider that there's a lot of people who haven't accepted that yet, and they're now going to undertake a pursuit of, I mean, it's a pursuit of ignorance, but like more so than that, it's like a pursuit of like the valor of illiteracy, in the sense that they are of the mind that there is no leader. They're of this antisocial mentality. So if we extend that to the degree that they believe it, that would mean that the illiterate deserve as much of a seat at the table as the specialized man, which is completely unreasonable to me. And so, like, when I look at what people do, generally, if not like 99.999% of the time, they get into Bitcoin, they want to run the Bitcoin software, and it is that time that they elect a leader, and they do so by downloading a pre-compiled binary. This notion of decentralization is well and good, and it is true and it is real, and I believe in it, but to a point. And to the point that we pursue illiteracy, wherein specialists aren't on the same level as, or the illiterate are at the same level as the specialists, that is not a brand of decentralization that I wish to pursue. So what we can probably consider is that the people who pursue illiteracy very well should be of the notion that Bitcoin Core is for them. And what will happen in that community as a result is a lot of ill will towards the programmers who know full well that they deserve more respect than an illiterate man. And so we bring them into Bitcoin official, the Bitcoin, and from there we do have some hard problems to solve, such as Bitcoin governance. We really need to hit like Hobbes and Rousseau a little bit more than I think we have in the past. I understand why a lot of the libertarian canon didn't include them. And the reason I think why is because they were effectively like American propagandists in a lot of ways. And like when you read them, you realize to the degree that like the American message isn't as noble as it was presented and is a little bit more manipulative maybe. But like, I think that in the Bitcoin space, we get the ability to revisit some of that stuff. And really what we get to do is like make it our thing. And in a lot of ways, I think that's what people wanted. People came to this space, not so much because they wanted a rock, but because they wanted our thing. Because they felt like they weren't advancing up the ladder in the entrenched regime, in the American regime as it stood, and or whatever country. And so if we take that and we ask ourselves, okay, well, what is it that was preventing us from advancement? Let's bring that here. That's a good starting point. And I think that we will find a lot of answers in the government's literature. I personally believe that we should be giving an inordinate amount of freedom to the developing community. I think the developers are extremely specialized at what they do. I think that what they principally do is find truth. This is why they're so disagreeable. Like, you can pursue morals or you can pursue truth. And morals generally create peace. Truth generally creates achievement. But like, you got to keep them in balance. So I think what we need to start deciding on a community is like, where will we draw the lines? So like this block size thing, I think that was a big distraction. What it really was a request by the community to involve itself on the side of like peace demarcation.
Mm-hmm.
I think more so than anything else. And so like that's going to keep on happening. So somebody has to manage the engineers and say like this is an engineering specialty, and like 99.999% of the time might just be that. But there are other times when it's like we have to relax the standard here, and so like that dialogue needs to happen. And I don't have all of the answers to that, but I know that with governance we can do that. But there's a few things I'd be real about. Like we can't make this a full democracy, especially off the bat, for a bunch of reasons we can discuss. So I think that sweat equity needs to be promoted. As a community, I think that we need to have some notion of rank that correlates with sweat equity. Frankly, one of the problems we've had in all these blockchains is that they are de facto plutocracies, meaning the people who have the most stake have the most say. But that's tyrannical because like you don't give the ability to those who want to create the most sacrifice to have an equal or even greater standing than those who put in no sacrifice. So like these are good conversations. This has been done before, and we've succeeded in the past with it, so I'm confident we can succeed in the future. It just needs a lot more stakeholders involved.
You know, I've been thinking a lot about the idea that this whole block size debate was actually a huge distraction, and especially thought about it when, you know, so Bitcoin Cash forked off with 8 megs, then went to 32. Now in November, you know, I just read this CoinGeek Calvin Ayre talking about, yeah, we totally support going to 128 megs, when at the same time they just did this stress test where on basically they spammed, benignly supposedly spammed the BCH to see, oh, what would happen. I mean, the network handled it, but most of the blocks were being mined with their block limit was set at 2 megs. And some of the people who had it set that there was CoinGeek. Like it was CoinGeek, 2 meg blocks. No miners had it set at 32. And so I'm just like, whoa, hold on. You're telling me that this whole time 2 megs could have got the job done? This whole time? And we've had this whole, we basically split the community in two over that it was really about 2 megs. That's really what this whole thing was about. Like it never needed to be.
It was a little bit more nuanced. Like, okay, so like, didn't mean to cut you off, sorry, but
no, please, take it.
So the problem, in my estimation, wasn't even about the 2 megabytes. It was about the faith that we would have in migrating to a fork. So like, from Core's perspective, I think we didn't have enough community allegiance to fork the network. And so while the block size had its own thing, what they were really arguing about was like, can we trust the network to upgrade? And I think in the cash side, the sort of, it's not even innocence, but it's something along those lines, that like we could upgrade without problem, was disconnected from the Core camp. But that's the thing. If you have two divisions, one that creates truth and one that creates peace, the peace side would be obligated to create a successful fork through the creation of morals and peace that ensures that. So like they work together, and it's been a little bit out of balance. And it's interesting because like when you buy Bitcoin Cash, you're buying the moral side of Bitcoin in a lot of ways, and then when you buy Bitcoin Core, you are buying the scientific side.
Yes.
But we should be able just to combine them into Bitcoin, and then we've got the best of both worlds.
I think that's a good point, and I've thought about that a lot, and it's actually been almost it certainly has been strange to me in seeing the Bitcoin Cash side, and actually seeing, I think it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, because I actually see the emergence of things that were just not valued on Bitcoin before we forked, even though maybe there's a lot of the same people, and maybe I think some people have entered just since the fork because it's engendered things like all these weird charity initiatives, and I'm like, well, there's a lot of people that really value giving away, not spending, not selling, like not using in commerce Bitcoin Cash, like giving it away. And that's something that just was not, it wasn't there when I first, you know what I mean? When I first bought my first Bitcoin in 2012, like that, the idea of giving away your Bitcoin is crazy. But
yeah, it's a demographic shift.
What's that?
It's a demographic shift. Like, you can see why people went left and why people went right. And it's politics. And like the reason for it, I think, is like this sort of innate propensity that some people have going into the system. And then the issues arise. And frankly, both sides are right. It's just the degree of which they're right. And then the humans that value that peace over truth, maybe go one side. Like what do you value more? If you have the choice, I would guess an answer. I don't want to lead you on though.
Yeah.
Do you, given a choice between peace or truth, not like in like the sense that like the world would be destroyed, but like in like a small everyday thing, which would you choose?
I mean, it's clear what I choose. I choose truth because my life is rarely peaceful, and I choose truth. I mean, look, you and I both wade into these things all the time because it's like peace without truth is, to me, is slavery, right? Like you can be a docile servant, that's fine, but I'm not really for that. I'd rather have the difficult truth. But at the same time, I don't want to just wade into a battle for no reason. There's also a time for it to be like, how important is it to me to be right? And is being right in this particular scenario actually doing the right thing? Like, I think there are white lies that I think that's for peace. And you choose that. You certainly choose that with children. You know, which I guess it brings me to maybe that's a good jumping off point to have a discussion about, since there is so much naivete, it seems, on certain sides, and there is a level of illiteracy. I'm not a big fan of democracy as a voluntarist, you know what I mean, because of the fact that in general there are more illiterate individuals headed to the polls, politically illiterate, than there are people who are politically astute and actually know what's going on. How do we not make those errors if we're going to start having at least somewhat of a democracy?
Yeah, so there's a very specific reason we can't have a democracy in Bitcoin, which is the Sybil attack potential, meaning if there's value to identity, then people are just going to spool up identities without cost, because Bitcoin exists this sort of simulation state online where we can't like sit there and like check like hospital records, nor would we want to. So that's like one thing. I mean, Plato talked about the need for an informed citizenry, and I believe that there's a very real problem in democracy when the citizenry becomes uninformed. And like, who knows what will happen here in America, but like, there are some days that I'm just like, that's really uninformed. I can't believe we decided to do that. But in the blockchain space, I think we need to start marching the drumbeat on that. It is sacrifice that creates sanctity. And that's generally true when you look at like what makes the dollar sacred to people. Like you see people that are working 40 hours a week or more, and they're being deprived of time that they could be spending with their family. And it is that act of sacrifice that creates a loop wherein like the dollar becomes holy because we sacrificed for it, and then it just keeps on repeating. So we need to create that wheel in this space. And it seems to me that I think there is a degree of voting that needs to probably happen, but it probably needs to happen within a rank. Which is really how the U.S. government kind of works, frankly.
Right, sure.
If you are specialized in energy policy, you work in the Department of Energy, I guess, and in there's a vote within those specialized people. If you believe in if you live in Miami, you get to vote on Miami issues.
Right.
And so we probably need to separate the space in terms of rank, which is, I think, the people who are putting sweat equity in and have demonstrated a degree of specialization and knowledge. And then within that rank, a jurisdiction of values that can be voted upon. And we can't overdo it. But the less is more, to be clear. The government that regulates least, government regulates best, whatever the saying is. But I think in that system, we can give developers a whole lot of leeway, make them very happy, keep them away from the general population, and the general population can do things like marketing, outreach, identity management, and just the economics, etc.
So there are people hearing this, and I've also seen the comments on Twitter, the response to this proposal that you just made here of having some level of governance, and I hear them say, Chris DeRose is a statist and he wants to implement a government into Bitcoin, which seems to me rather difficult to do when at any time there could be that someone could just fork off and be like, screw that, like I'm gone. It seems very difficult to enforce. What is your idea for? I mean, are you talking about a government? I'm assuming that we're talking about something that's voluntary, but how do we enforce these rules? Like, how would something like that work?
Right. So people want to pin me with the promotion. Like, don't shoot the messenger. Yes, I tapped the domino, but I didn't set up the market forces. I was just the guy who saw that this had to go over and somebody had to press it. The reality is that you, the person watching this, have chosen a Bitcoin government already. You do that when you go to a website and you download Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin that is given to you is the submission to an authority. You are saying, choose for me, authority, this Bitcoin. And then I don't know what you chose. Maybe you chose, something that was a Bitcoin Cash, and we can talk about what that means, or maybe you chose something Bitcoin Core, and then at that level we can say, okay, the Bitcoin that was chosen for you, that you subjected yourself to, was developed by this process. And the process, to be clear, I think is like Roger. I think that he made a couple of mistakes, and it's easy for me to say now in hindsight. Like, I get that. I do think that Bitcoin Core is an aristocracy. I think that it is of a significant degree of merit. I think that a lot of the problems we've had in community relations is not recognizing that. And I think that everybody knows this for two reasons. Number one, all of the code bases, even outside of Bitcoin, are like 90% plus their code.
Yeah.
So like Bitcoin Cash, I don't know what percent that is, but it's huge.
It's a lot.
Lot. Right. Even in Litecoin, it's probably huge.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one thing. The second thing is that like the primary contention that people had has been this one variable size that was the block size. And whether it was right or wrong is besides the point. The point is that was your contention with the Bitcoin government. So here I am, and I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is I know where to find the answers, and that if people see, if they can just step outside of the matrix and say, this isn't a rock, this was a process, you immediately are a government. You just enter the world of government. You, the person who stepped outside the matrix, this isn't a rock, now are of a government that you have volunteered into. Now, which one did you volunteer into is the question. Not which one is Chris advocating, but which one have you decided? Because you just did. Or you already did. A lot of this is the man behind the curtain. Like, Bitcoin Core wants to make the rock chain. Well, I don't know if the market's going to have that anymore.
Okay. So, I mean, in terms of formalizing this, in terms of picking up, as you say, like picking up the brand, becoming Bitcoin official, moving out of the power vacuum, what are the things that whoever wants to pick? Well, first off, let's say clearly not everybody can pick up this mantle. It's not going to be Bitcoin Gold. It's not going to be Bitcoin Private. I think really what we're talking about here is it's either going to be Bitcoin Core, which is really in many ways it's kind of a weird to call it Bitcoin Core is, I admit, weird, because there are even, development teams out there like Bitcoin Unlimited that have a Bitcoin BTC client and that also produce a Bitcoin Cash client, and they mine both of them, right? So it's like those Bitcoin Unlimited are interacting with Bitcoin Core, certainly, and it's just like, I know that it's much easier to maybe call it Bitcoin Core, and I think a lot of that has to do with Roger and his own sort of political, again, with his own political drumbeat, right? First off, how about this? Is there a Bitcoin official at this point in your opinion?
Okay, so on that note, here's what we need to wait for right now. The response from Bitcoin Core on this. Now, I know that all these people right now are probably foaming at the mouth at Chris DeRose. Like, I could name them. I'm just going to do them the favor of not doing that. And what I'm telling you, the person who's foaming at the mouth right now, don't blame me, the messenger. Don't blame Roger, the quote-unquote invader. Blame your leaders for not defending your identity. Now, if you've chosen Bitcoin Core and they haven't defended your identity, your problem lies with them. Don't bring it to us. You can't blame, like Christopher Columbus came to America, right? Controversial, I get it. But like in reality, if Christopher Columbus didn't come over with a boomstick, somebody else would have. So like maybe he was a shitty guy because he was the first guy. I'm open to that, fine. But also maybe like it was undefended land. It was a power vacuum. And like in terms of what we have right now, it is undefended. So this is what will the progression will be. And you need to consider that's probably what brought us here. In terms of the next step, like we got to stay away from the suffixes, I think. So there's Bitcoin X, there's Bitcoin Y, there's Bitcoin A, there's Bitcoin B. There's just, going forward, only Bitcoin. And if we just rally the identity of Bitcoin, we march, it's Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin. If anyone wants to create a suffix, that's fine, but they're not part of the brand anymore. And so like they are just a crazy, or they are just a malcontent. There's only Bitcoin. And we will motivate the ignorance as a community on any notion of suffix. If you bring to us this notion of a Bitcoin subdivision, that's fine, but like I only know about Bitcoin. Sorry. The Bcashers are the people who say Bcash. That's why they're called Bcashers. This is how the march begins. And like the mission statement starts to reform this. The mission statement, once you have a cadence, continues that cadence and strengthens it. And over time, it becomes sacred as people sacrifice for that cadence. And I think that what we probably have to do now is let just a few things settle. We have major opinions that need to weigh in. Roger Ver needs to probably come over here and say what he has to say. We need to see if Bitcoin Core is a response. My suspicion is that they won't. They will continue to motivate the ignorance that this is a rock. And so now we have to see if the people who are for Bitcoin join the Bitcoin march, and if the Bcashers continue to resent the success of Bitcoin. I think that's what happens next.
Okay, so I mean, there's clearly some logistical issues here, and I think some concerns that people will have about the UTXOs that they're holding when they hear you say this. Clearly, there was a massive backlash against, and it wasn't even Roger. Come to find out, I know exactly who it was because he told me in Hong Kong that it was him as a troll who changed the on Bitcoin.com, who changed it to Bitcoin. And then BCH, and then Bitcoin Core. That wasn't even Roger. But there was a huge backlash just against that happening. Because people are concerned about, I mean, you've beyond what we're concerned about the future of this, about the emergent community, about what this is going to mean for generations to come. There's a lot of people out there, and look, I mean, and us included, I'm not completely unconcerned about what's going on behind that ticker symbol at any given market. That does concern me. It does concern my day-to-day existence. I know it does yours as well. How do we help to bridge the gap, or how do we help to allay the fears of people that what Chris DeRose is suggesting, and you're maybe winning me over here, that what Chris DeRose is actually suggesting here is to destroy the value of what I'm holding behind this ticker symbol?
Okay, so this is also very big. Right now, we have these weird allegiances as a result of the tickers that I don't think are productive. In the same way that I don't have to, as a Florida man, succeed at the failure of New Hampshire, you should not have to succeed at the failure of the Bcashers. And I think that as an industry, as a group, we need to probably promote indexing. And for me, I intend to switch to that. And so we have to consider that Bitcoin may be an index. It may be an index, at least for a while. We may want to diversify in some way from whichever Bitcoin we have now so that we are ensured to receive the commensurate amount of Bitcoin at the end of the day. And I think that's a good compromise. People seem to think that these allegiances aren't liquid enough, I guess, to diversify. And that's a very like caveman mentality. So I don't see this with, and I know this isn't a financial product exactly, but I don't see this with like, the typical markets. Like for example, I have exposure to both like Burger King and McDonald's, and when the burger industry does well, I do well, and I think that that's the mentality we need to encourage here. I think that this notion that I'm stuck with the Burger King burgers, like it's so stupid. Just like diversify. It's okay. Like index. Let's have fun again. Let's stop being rock people.
I mean, it's interesting that you bring up this index because this is something that also Daniel Krawitz, who we're going to do something here in New Hampshire. Speaking of New Hampshire, we'll talk about that at the end in October, the three of us together.
Am I included on that? I think I'm officially included. I'm not sure. If not, I might just show up either way. You have to deal with me.
Get out of here. Yeah, I mean, it's something that he's brought up, but he's brought it up from the financial side, certainly, but I think that it may be a solution to allowing these communities some space to be able to come back together in that well, look, I'm holding UTXOs from your side, you're holding UTXOs from my side. Like, maybe there's only one side, right? Maybe the side is Bitcoin, and maybe we can get these things back to being a lot closer to one another. And as you say, it is very liquid. So, I mean, I hate to bring up Roger and put you on the spot in this situation, but I've heard you say some things that I know are going to upset a lot of people. Just even the idea of diversifying. Do you think, though, that there is actually a chance in this scenario? I mean, I personally like the idea, or I've gotten maybe used to the idea of there being the rock chain, and maybe some concept that, well, at least this rock chain can serve as a sort of insurance policy if some bad decisions are made on these other chains, which Bitcoin Gold's had a 51% attack. Those of us in the Bitcoin Cash community who are, heavily invested in it, down to the fact that my full-time business takes only revenue in Bitcoin Cash, and we took our seed funding at VC in Bitcoin Cash, that it's like, there are some decisions that are maybe not, that don't look like they are being done with the best of faith on this side. Don't you think that there's actually some risk, though, to whether this rock meme is truth or not, that perhaps just leaving it in peace is maybe the right move from a financial standpoint?
I mean, we've got this postmodern thing is not a small deal. Like, postmodern man really happened. So we are now confronted with some really cool potential, but a lot of this is deeper than just Bitcoin, as it always is. And to what degree is the dollar, like the notion that the dollar isn't real has always been a staple of community value. And it's interesting because, like, what Mises had it codified in specie, like this, I keep returning to this in varying ways, but like, specie is what makes things real. Like, it's like, give it detached from realness. Humans will generally choose peace over fact. Like, we touched on this briefly. You would choose truth. I'm pretty sure I would choose truth. I think a balance is appropriate, but I think most people would choose peace.
Clearly.
And so like in Mises, I think the takeaway might be that, like, specie is what made things real. And I don't know how that plays into things here, because it never existed in Bitcoin, but it also doesn't exist in the dollar. And so, like, if maybe, like, the rock is valuable, that's fine, but that might mean that the dollar isn't valuable, and like, it gets very wishy-washy. I don't know what to tell you other than a lot of this comes down to specie, and if you do find the rock valuable, you may just need to go with specie. And, like, we offer memes with specie. Peter Schiff will sell you a meme with specie.
Right.
That's his specialty. I don't know. Here's the thing. Like, we have to do this meta game, this Keynesian beauty game, wherein, like, you may be woke, the person watching this, or Vin, or whoever, but we have them to think about, and they are the millennials or Generation Z, and these are people that have never been exposed to specie. They are not only of the postmodern condition, but probably of, like, a hyperreal condition, which is a whole nother subject, wherein, like, maybe, like, society is just in this weird spot, and maybe it's no longer real anymore, and maybe that's okay, or maybe that's not. So, like, these questions are deeper. I just don't think it's Bitcoin's problem anymore. I think Bitcoin needs to have the realization that we never offered specie, that was an illusion, and that's probably okay. And maybe that means some people will leave, but maybe that means we'll get more people, and like, that's the balance.
It's interesting that you brought up the millennials and Generation Z, because what's weird is that I'm starting to see more and more, and I'm seeing this with some crossover between you and Krawitz and myself, and people who seem to be sort of moving between, and they seem to be getting younger and younger, with only a very, for me it's weird because they seem to only have a very tenuous, like, connection with the voluntarism or libertarian side, and the cryptocurrency as well, almost as though, like, those memes are just the norm in a way for them, that it's like, yeah, that's probably moral, like, Bitcoin is probably moral, And so I'm just moving in that direction, and I'm these people happen to also feel that those things are moral, but I'm listening to them on sort of another idea, which brings me to what we're going to be talking about here in New Hampshire, which I should let everybody know. It's confirmed. It's going to be on October 11th. It's going to be myself, Chris DeRose, Daniel Krawitz. We're going to be at the Blockchain Institute of Technology in Portsmouth during the Free Coast Blockchain and Digital Assets Conference, and we're going to do a talk. It's going to be a little cocktail hour, and we're going to do a talk on the ideal Bitcoiner. So I think that, seeing these young people come in and seeing beyond the idea of a march, beyond the idea of I'm talking beyond the idea of community and towards the idea of the individual, as these people are looking for something to grow themselves as individuals in this hyper-real, postmodern milieu that they're inside of. Here's this concept of the ideal Bitcoiner. And maybe the ideal Bitcoiner, as I think about it more and more, maybe, and it's your concept, maybe that is the concept that
Plato's concept. I'd never had an original idea in my life.
But maybe that is the concept that these young individuals can be looking up to, because what else do they have to look up to, right? So maybe if you could talk a little bit about how the ideal Bitcoiner fits into this whole equation.
Okay, so there's a lot that goes into this, and I'm glad you brought this up now. So right now I'm going to have a conversation with you, Vin. This is The audience is more than encouraged to listen, but this is to Vin. You, myself, Krawitz, Kevin Pham, maybe one or two others. We exist on this side of the spectrum in Bitcoin that is fairly tethered towards truth. And we've watched as these other people have shown up with just crazy view counts. And we look at them and we're like, what the fuck is going on over there? Maybe you don't do that, but I do that. And what I've started to realize is roughly this. Humans march towards the utopia. This is their function. And they know they're marching towards utopia when they receive affirmation. And we see this in varying forms. Like when you watch TV, for example, there's usually 20 minutes of content that is affirming, and then there's 10 minutes of instruction. So there's a cadence to how the humans march. It's generally peace, peace, instruction, peace, peace, instruction. And they know it's peace because it is affirmed. So when you look at channels that are offering a de-risking of the unknown, even if it's not true, it's affirmational. So fortune teller channels, we don't have to say which, or varying to the moon channels, we don't have to say which. What's going on is that the humans are receiving affirmational messages, and for every 2 affirmational messages they receive, that is one instruction that they will embark upon. And so obviously the purveyors of these things will often send them off in directions that are there's a responsibility to it. Some are fairly decent, some aren't. So I think the intellectual dark web will always be lamented by the people who seek peace, because it doesn't offer peace. But meanwhile, it concerns itself with the third of their content that is the instructional component, and that's where the power is that I think our platforms offer. So that kind of relates into what I think I see here in terms of what we're designing, because in some level, if this Bitcoin thing works, you came into this to reboot the system. If you really meant that, dude, we got to have these conversations. It's not going to be affirmation all the time. There needs to be instruction, and we need to I think embrace that more as a community, and just say to others this is how class works. Class is such that there are specialists who do programming. There are specialists who do instructionals to the march, and then there's the happy hoi polloi, and the happy hoi polloi shouldn't be denigrated. They should be appreciated. We like to like them. These are people who are totally fucking cool. They're the guys who snowboard, and they're the guys who go, they go surfboarding and skating, and they do tricks for us, and they dance, and they do great, awesome things. They make cars that go 200 miles an hour, and so on and so forth. So that function in society needs to be comprehended, and lecturing those people with the need to accept Mises into their heart is not appropriate. That's not what makes them happy. What makes them happy is snowboarding. That was kind of a rant. Okay, so back to the audience. What was the question again?
The ideal Bitcoiner. The ideal Bitcoiner. How do we start to approach the ideal Bitcoiner?
So the ideal Bitcoiner, as best I can tell, is we need to decide what the function will be. I think that the function will be what we want the happy hoi polloi to be. And so the ideal Bitcoiner shouldn't necessarily have to concern himself with instruction. The ideal Bitcoiner probably needs to exist for the purpose of affirmation, to know that what's happening is okay. There's a degree of that that's sheeple, I get that, but there's also a degree of that that's noble. And for me, I'd like to reverence as a guiding principle, because number one, I'm watching the Jerry Falwells of the rock chain just become incorrigible. Nobody likes to like them. Okay. Number two, like it's a nice interface for me to be able to come into a room and have like a de-risked identity and say like, these are cool things that I like, I know you like, and if we want to do instructional time, we can do it or not. Like it doesn't have to be like a matter of like overbearingness. It could just be like a point. So I think that with irreverence, it gives us a fun way to connect with each other and to aspire to have nice conversation. So like if irreverence is fun and jokes are good, then we can exist with a happy hoi polloi. We can like to like them. It also, so here's this is another interesting thing. This is fairly Rousseauian. Humans, this is very like, okay, I'm just going to be like a little bit.
Do it.
I'm just going to, yeah. So humans do like programming. We know this, okay? They're mostly deterministic, and we know this because we drive. When we drive, we are told to stay on the side of the road. And most people check the fuck out. They just start going. And then they get to where they're going, and they're like, well, what happened over the last 20 minutes?
Right.
And they're like, oh, I drove. And they have no recollection of what the fuck happened. So they're in autopilot for that time. So, like, humans are deterministic 80% of the time or so. And I think that we need to probably recognize that it is the government's job to define those parameters. If we come up with an objection handling routine, then when a hoi polloi, a happy hoi polloi, like snaps out of something, we can refer to the objection handling routine, and that will communicate to them what to do in that case of an objection. With irreverence at the top, the objection handling routine can be a joke, and that can reaffirm to the happy hoi polloi that things are happy and they're good. So as a first principle, that's very good. I think everyone can probably find that as long as they can embrace irreverence, everybody will be happy, and it's an easy way to keep like the affirmation in line for the people who want to be on autopilot. And for the people that don't want to be on autopilot, now we need to come up with some more components to the ideal Bitcoiner, which I can think of many, but that needs to be a group conversation, and everyone has to input on that.
Well, I can't. I'm enjoying being part of the conversation. We've reached the end of this one, but I do have to say I like irreverence as being very important. I've found that that having a sense of humor and not taking this imaginary good too seriously, even though it determines whether or not a lot of us eat, still that the best way to make sure that you're going to get the most out of it has seemed to be not taking it too seriously. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that.
It disarms people. Like if we revert to irreverence as opposed to like the Jerry Falwells, we can at least disarm emotions in a way that is constructive. So like when tempers flare and things look bleak, we can crack jokes and then we can release that pressure. And like that's the function, I think, of irreverence in society when it works well.
I love it. Well, I think with that, thank you so much for being on. Can't wait to see you up here in New Hampshire. Give you a nice tour of Portsmouth. I think you're going to have a great time, and it's a great venue. I advise everybody to come up and check it out. I think we'll probably have a full house. So Chris DeRose, thank you so much for being on. Everybody go and follow him, twitter.com/Chris DeRose. Oh, /DeRose, at DeRose. All right. See you later, man. Thank you.
Later, bud.
Christian. Oh, Christian, you're muted. There you are. Christian.
Yeah, that was great.
I think
always good stuff.
Oh, dude. I mean, just on point. It's a bit of a. I'm glad that there are other people in the space who are thinking about the human element of this whole thing.
Right.
And who actually care and who are looking towards the future and see this as a bigger project, because I see this as maybe the biggest project. I mean, I don't want to say ever, but it certainly is the biggest project probably since, I don't know, in the last 2,000 years, probably. I think the start of Christianity was probably the last big project like this.
It's crazy.
And here we are smack dab in the middle of like that next phase. And I think that people looking for ways to bring the community back together, I like that march. Like, yeah, I like the idea of how can we create some space for those of us who are willing to find some common ground. Like, how can we create that space? If we can create that space, man, I'm all in. I'm all in.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's great.
So
what a show.
Yeah, thank you, man, and thank you for being a part of it. Yeah, I think this was a good one. I may have to go back and watch this one again. Well, let me say goodbye to the people since we've reached it. Thanks for the show today,
all
Christian.
Right, thank you.
Well, thank you all for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you, of course, to my guest, Chris DeRose. Always great to talk with him. You will be getting, so I'll be having more information, and we'll be sharing that about the evening that we are going to have with myself, Daniel Krawitz, and Chris DeRose. It's a very limited engagement. The Blockchain Institute of Technology has a limited capacity there right in Portsmouth, but it's going to be super cool on October 11th. Little cocktail hour, and then we're going to have a talk about the ideal Bitcoiner, which I'm sure will be one to remember. I'm assuming we'll probably have it live streamed as well for those of you who don't manage to make it, but it will at least be recorded, so be on the lookout for that. And in addition to thank you, my guest, I want to thank all of you for hanging out, and I want to send a shout out to those people who are willing to come back together and bring this Bitcoin community forward. We've had our schism. You know, I've thought that those schisms would just continue, but perhaps we can turn a corner on this. Perhaps people paying attention, we don't have to repeat history in exactly the same way. So I'm all for truth. I'm also for a lot of peace, and I would like to see that, and hopefully it's something I can contribute to as we move forward. So with that, we will be back again next Monday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and until then, stay free.